Alrighty. So kind of this first slide's going to, well, I guess I'm talking to the screen. The first slide's kind of just going to give like the 4 areas that kind of are driving demand in the zero emission space. And as you kind of see, that red line indicates our internal kind of combustion demand that we're kind of forecasting for and kind of planning with based on what the market conditions are today. And a lot of the different pieces that kind of come into play are the growing demand of those. The Memorandum of Understanding states for ACT, ACF that are coming in 2024, 2025, 2026, like the ACT rulings that it kind of touches on there. And then also just the kind of the demand for those actual vehicles themselves, so that whether that be you're staying ahead of regulations, the image side of things for sustainability, the TCO benefits of your zero emissions vehicles, which that can be a hot topic there, and then your federal and state incentives. And a lot of those kind of come into play and work hand in hand, but kind of over time, the space for zero emissions can continue to grow, and what that exactly is, I think is kind of the big question in the room. Is there's battery electric, there's hydrogen internal combustion engines that technically don't count for zero emissions, and then there's hydrogen fuel cell vehicles out there today currently. And so Dan actually had a great slide that kind of showed a lot of alternative fuels, and the challenge of zero emissions is, well, yes, there's a lot of alternative fuels out there, like natural gas, your propane, et cetera. Zero emissions in the trucking standpoint is only counted for by your battery electric vehicles or your hydrogen fuel cell trucks. And so it kind of puts you in a little bit of a more narrow scoped box. And so to kind of give a little overview of the regulatory landscape for the California Air Resources Board, which I hope many of you are all familiar with, but if not, I can definitely talk more after this on what that is. But basically 16 states in Canada have signed a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on emission regulations. And so there's kind of 2 big pieces of that. So you have advanced clean trucks, so ACT, which sets the requirements on us as the OEMs, and basically it gives like our dealers an allotment of a percentage of allotment of where we can actually sell trucks. So for example, in 2020, you're looking at, you can sell probably 20, for every zero emission truck sold in California, it unlocks 20 different diesel trucks. And then where it kind of gets more challenging as you kind of go down this path is kind of the advanced clean fleets. And so that sets the purchase requirements on the fleet and owner operators themselves. And you can kind of see which states are adopting and when. So 2024 is California. They're the only ones that are also adopting ACF currently in 2025. And then each state kind of along the coast, as it's been mentioned, continues to kind of adopt them. The next one is like a big, from an emission standpoint, is our low NOx omnibus. And again, where it continues to get challenging, and I have a slide that kind of shows on it, and when there's different states adopting, is there's just going to be a different emission regulations that are beyond the current EPA standards today. And then also kind of the next challenge is states are adopting at all different timing. And so it's kind of balancing on that when it comes to where we can sell and how we can sell. Louisiana currently is not it's not challenged by those, but it will be challenged by the emission standards in 2027. This slide kind of shows those regulations, so kind of where we're currently at today, and then in 2024, where CARB is mandating kind of the tailpipe emissions there, our NOx emissions to 0.05, so we have to be able to produce engines that produce that much emissions, or reduce our emissions to that, I should say. And then low NOx omnibus, where each state continues to adopt those in different standpoints. And then in 2027, CARB and EPA, they all meet up to that 0.035. And that's where it gets more challenging, because that's not just the states that have adopted these, it's all 50 states. And you can kind of see where we're at today at 0.2 and the continued challenges of that, as we're going to have an engine that's CARB compliant that launches this year, mid this year. Cummins will as well. And then it kind of continues to get more challenging as you look into the horizon. All right, so I kind of mentioned like the different states and when they're adopting. You can kind of see ACT in all the different states, or majority of the different states there, and kind of what ACF means and who are affected. Right now, it's kind of your high priority fleets, whether that's more than 50 trucks or 50 million in annual revenue. You have your California fleet, so basically if you go into California more than one day per year, your drayage fleets where any fleet that will be registered in the port system, and by 2035, they all have to be zero-emission vehicles for all new fleets, and then your public fleets. And where this also kind of, like where ACT puts the requirements on us as the OEM, it marries up with the fleet operators on the ACF side to actually have zero emissions trucks into their plan, but also for currently until we get into the outer years, your low NOx omnibus, where different states are adopting that, and that's where we can actually sell only certain engine platforms into those states, and it continues to kind of get more and more challenging there. And I have a slide that will highlight this briefly. So you kind of have your, we like to say your baby cub is that advanced clean fleet and advanced clean truck. They're coming, you know that they're there, they're kind of cute, but it might be a little bit more challenging to deal with because they're gonna grow and get bigger. But then you got Mama Bear coming, and that's your greenhouse gases phase 3. It's in 2027, and that's where you're going to see both the zero emissions volume kind of sector continue to grow as these requirements are pushed down, because as we go down this path, we're going to create a deficit for every truck or diesel truck that's produced in 2027 and beyond from like a credit standpoint. And Dan did a great job kind of highlighting unicorns and rainbows. That's kind of where the credits kind of comes into play as it becomes more and more challenging to balance how many credits we're producing from an engine standpoint to how much we can actually sell trucks, and that's where it becomes we have a whole team that's dedicated just looking at that. And kind of to highlight a little bit more of the regulatory standpoint and what's coming in 27 is it's not just your ACT states, it's going to be, or your CARB compliant states, I should say, it's going to be all 50 states. And so Cummins won't actually have an engine, as I understand, until 2029 that's compliant to this standpoint. We will have our MX-13, a version of that will be EPA compliant, available in 2027. And so the biggest standpoint here is, like I alluded to, is we're going to be creating diesel deficits, or excuse me, we'll be creating credit deficits for every diesel engine that we produce for these trucks. And so how you offset that becomes with the purchase of your zero emissions vehicles. And so, for example, in 2024, that's about for every 20 diesel trucks to 1 zero emission, and then it continues to get worse and worse. And in 2026, you're going to be looking at for every 10 diesel trucks you want to buy, you have to buy at least 1 zero emissions truck, and that becomes just like an allotment with the dealers. And from like an outlook standpoint as to kind of what we offer today, again, I liked a lot of what Dan had to say earlier. You kind of have your local and regional applications. Those might be from like a golf analogy standpoint, like your wedges, or maybe your short irons, where you're not trying to hit it too far. And like our K-Series truck, we have 2 different platforms. That's your 270E and your 370E, and those can get up to 200 miles. And then you have your regional and also local application, which is our T680E, which can get you 150 miles. And to kind of cover that gap as you're kind of going down the fairway, your long haul application, which will be your driver, that's going to be your 400 plus miles, and that'll be our fuel cell hydrogen truck. And that's coming in 2026, and I'll kind of give an overview of all what those are. But this is kind of how we're looking at the market today and what we can currently get to. Regulations came out, and we had to kind of pivot to be able to support not only our customers, but our dealers and ourselves to be able to actually sell trucks into any state. What PACCAR has kind of done, so to kind of give a brief overview really quickly, as I didn't touch on it, we have PACCAR, and then there's Kenworth, Peterbilt, and then DAF, our European sister company. And so we operate all under the same umbrella. And then there's PACCAR Parts, which supports all of those. PACCAR as a whole, for all of our battery electric solutions, provides lithium iron phosphate batteries. We had the strategy to produce it's probably a little bit heavier composition than your nickel magnesium batteries that are out there, but the thought was it's a cobalt-free composition. It's less likely for a thermal event. I know we're in a space where we don't like to say the 4-letter F word, and it's not one that my kids can say, but it's one that we all don't like to mention in the battery electric world, just because it is very faux pas when you see one on the side of the road. And so we kind of went with a different strategy there. And the idea is that these are going to be more durable and they're going to last a lot longer. 4,000 charge-to-charge cycles. And so what I like to tell people is if you're just using them, if you're charging them one time a day from like your heavy-duty application, so one time and you do that 365 days out of the year, times 10 years is kind of like the duration you can kind of look at, and we'd say like 8+ years from your heavy-duty service cycle. And this will be in all of our platforms. The one caveat here is our fuel cell truck actually has nickel magnesium, and that's only because the battery pack in itself is not being charged. It's just going to be on board being powered by the fuel cell. But PACCAR kind of doubled down on this effort, and I think that you can see the industry pivoting as we actually entered a joint venture with Cummins, Daimler, ourselves, and EVE Energy to produce our own batteries starting in 2027 in Mississippi, and those will be in production then for a 21 gigawatt hour factory. And so I think the industry is kind of more saying this is kind of the way to go, at least in our eyes. So to give a little overview as our medium duty trucks, these are our class 6, class 7, and we can do a baby 8. You have our K270E, that's your class 6 non-CDL version of our truck. Then you can get into your class 7, class 8, so these are going to be 33,000 to 34,000 pounds. The vehicle weight in itself, this is where it kind of gets challenging in the battery electric world, is they definitely are heavier. But you get a 2,000 pound weight exception for these, same thing on the class 8 trucks. We have 3 different wheelbase options, 206 inches all the way up to 274 inches, 3 different box options. Depending on the charger that you have, you can look at 1.5 hours to 2 hour charge time. Our 270 has and I'll talk about the different battery packs because we have 3 different battery packs. The 141 kilowatt hour battery pack can accept 75 kilowatts. Our other 2 battery packs, the 200 kilowatt hour and the 282 kilowatt hour, they can both take 150 kilowatt from a charge standpoint, and so that's where you're looking at your 2 hour charge time. These trucks, everything that we do is baseline to like our diesel standards today, and so power is not an issue. Depending on which one you choose, you're looking at 360 horsepower all the way up to 496 continuous horsepower for these, 2,000 foot-pounds of torque all the way up to 2,500 foot-pounds of torque. And so we have, I would say, if you get behind the wheel of them, I don't know if anybody's driven electric vehicles, or especially even the medium-duty or heavy-duty sector in the room, but I'm sure many of you have. I would say like instantaneous torque is a real thing. These things are incredibly smooth. Regenerative braking can add 10 to 20% more range, and that's how we can kind of get to 200 miles with these. And so yeah, so just kind of to moving on. Oh, and I forgot to mention the one difference of this than which the next truck I'll mention is this is a central drive power unit. And so Dana produces that, and it powers just your normal axles that you would see on any of our diesel trucks. On the T680E in this current phase, you actually have 2 Meritor E-axles, so kind of on the diagram on the bottom right, you can kind of see those by the tires. And let's see how I'm doing on time. A little over time, so I'll pick it up. We have kind of 2 different, you have your tractor configuration, or you can do a straight truck depending on what you're looking for, so 2 different wheelbase options. Again, I mentioned battery electric. Trucks are heavy, and that's really just because battery packs right now are kind of the big denominator as to why our trucks are more heavy. So when you look at like a payload standpoint, you're taking about a 5,000 pound hit to your payload after that exception to what you're able to actually haul. We can do EPTOs. You're looking at around a 3 hour charge time. This truck can take 150 kilowatts. It has a 396 kilowatt hour battery pack, so 2 of those on board, kind of where your fuel cells sit. Your range is up to 150 miles, and that's tested with a load using regenerative braking. We have regenerative braking on this one of 4 different options, 0 all the way up to 100%. And a lot of that 150 mile range is just a lot about driver training and getting your drivers kind of used to how a battery electric vehicle operates. I alluded to it in the last slide, but again, like a power is not the issue when it comes to these. The payload, if you can get the tag axle, we don't actually offer that, but dealers have done it and can put that on there. It's not about the ability to haul the weight, it's just about the range impact and what that looks like. As this truck puts out over 1,600 foot-pounds of torque and all the way up to 670 peak horsepower. Moving along, I would say this one kind of gets the industry a little bit more excited. When we were just at ACT Expo, I think a lot of people we're excited about seeing this truck, and it's something I would encourage everyone to kind of look at, as especially as a different way to invest into the future. Battery electric is like that great niche if you kind of can focus on your local application under 200 miles, and our future iterations will have different battery pack strings that you'll get you up to 250 miles. But hydrogen is kind of like that next sector that can kind of get you to that 400 plus miles and can be on the road as well as your local application, and it kind of mimics a lot more of the fueling that you're used to on the diesel side. And so this is kind of our fuel cell, or what we call our T680 FCEV. That's coming out in late 2025, full production in 2026. The weight comparison is that of our T680E, so 22.5, full, like gross combined weight, 82,000 pounds. We have a partnership, or I mean, we are partners, but Toyota is producing the fuel cell module, so we have a dual stack fuel cell that kind of sits under the hood. That they produce, and that is driving, when we talk about costs, I haven't mentioned that because I technically can't quote that, but Kenworth of Louisiana, they definitely can. But you're looking at a truck that's probably 4 or 5 times more expensive than your diesel truck today. And that's just because fuel stacks are expensive. The demand's not quite there, but as we kind of come down that learning curve as to the new technology out there, hopefully you're going to see more and more of that cost kind of come down. The next challenge when it comes to these fuel cell vehicles is where you're going to get hydrogen, and a lot of companies, private sectors, your big companies are investing in that, and we actually have a subject matter expert on our team that works with the different fueling providers to try to create a heat map to say where can actually customers get a hydrogen truck to be able to actually refuel, because we would never want to put someone in a truck where they actually can't go fuel it up. So with that, this truck can take 60 kilograms of hydrogen. It has six fuel tanks, hydrogen fuel tanks that sit behind the cab. You're looking at around a 30-minute refuel time. And the difference of this one than our T680E is the T680E has your dual E-axles, so the motors and the transmission are in the axles, whereas this is a central drive unit. Our next iteration will also be a central drive unit on our battery electric version. And then your range is your 400 plus miles. And then lastly, just to kind of, again, diesel comparisons, the power, we're looking at I think it's 1770 for foot-pounds of torque and around 415 continuous horsepower of this truck. And so we're trying to get, again, rating ourselves to what our diesel trucks can do today, and this is right on par. We actually have proved out this technology. We've been working with Toyota for almost 6-7 years now. We've done different iterations. We've done an ocean to shore program where we produced 10 of these, and this is just the next phase that's kind of coming to have that technology out there in 2026. 2 more slides, and then it's lunchtime. And so kind of how we look at this is a little bit different than if Kenworth of Louisiana was to sell you their diesel truck and you just walk across over to your Love station and you fill up, and the way you rock and roll to your operation is from the Kenworth side is we have to support and help you figure out how you're going to not only buy the truck, which is where I kind of come into play, but then we partner with our Pack Our Parts solutions, where how are you going to charge the truck? And then I think what everybody's kind of touched on, and I think a lot of the challenges that we're seeing is the grid constraint, and or how you're going to actually install or have the power to actually use the charger to then actually use the truck. All that's great, but then how are you going to actually pay for that? Because what I also touched on is they're more expensive. And I think right now, at least in a lot of your states where they've adopted your California Air Resources Board ACT rulings, there's a lot of grant funding out there, especially if you're a port operator, or a drayage operator and working within the ports. And like my biggest thing that I try to tell people is get started early, like try to develop that plan, whether it's if you want to go down this path, like the best thing you can do is start doing it, and you can always say no to some of the money if it's available, and you can apply. We will work with you. We have grant writers on our team that support the customer from both the charging and the EV trucks themselves or the fuel cell, and we work with you to try to help find the right solution, because we would never put you in a truck where you actually can't charge it or really doesn't make sense for your operation. And so we have different members on our team that support that. I know Cumir was on another person's slide on the GM side. They're a great solution. We worked with them to try to help design and plan the infrastructure. They'll come out and they'll look at your site, very minimal impact on their side. And then again, we have Pack Our Parts and ourselves on Kenworth to kind of support all of that. All right, 10 minutes over. So that's all I had. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Ann. All right.